Welcome back, A-Push Scholars. Mr. Beamer here. We're going to finish period 1, the end of chapter 1 in our book. We want to thank Ricky Martin for that exciting introduction. Why is Ricky Martin in an A-Push video? Well, Ricky Martin is Latino, and we're going to make a reference to the Spanish, because the Spanish were very dominant, especially beginning with Christopher Columbus, helping discover the New World for the Europeans. So this is the last keynote on period 1. Let's just emphasize the years again. 1491 is the beginning of period 1. It is the year before the Europeans arrived in North and South America. So it's the year before Columbus arrived. 1607 is the significant year because that is years of the first English settlement. Any guesses what it is? Jamestown. Okay, the next 3 slides are pretty heavy in the key concepts, okay, part of the concept outline, and so again, period 1 is not really covered in detail in the book, I feel, and so we are going to give you the key concepts right from the College Board. So the first thing I want you to do is to read 1.21, this first topic, and section A, and I would highlight and underline some important and key things. All right, so let's see what you underlined. Hopefully you had a chance to do that. So in 1.21, the first who question is European expansion. So this is the group of people, Europeans. Where are they going? They're going into the Western Hemisphere. And what is the cause of this? A little bit of causation. It causes intense social, religious, political, and economic competition, okay, between the leading countries of Europe. And so when we think of the leading countries of Europe, really throughout history, but especially around 1500, we think of 3. Any guesses? The 3 big European countries. 1, the Spanish, 2, the French, and 3, the English. Okay, so let's look at section A and underline some of the key things. I think, again, we're talking about the Europeans, and they were exploring and trying to conquer the New World. The New World is North and South America. And then I think part A answers the question, why? Why are they doing this? Well, there's many reasons I think that you need to know. One is wealth, to find gold. Also economic and military competition. So they're competing against each other. They want to be wealthier, stronger, more powerful. So if you wanted to be the most powerful country in Europe, you had to search for new sources of land and resources. And a third reason why this new exploration to New World is to spread Christianity. As historians, hopefully you're trying to figure out which one do you think is the biggest reason why. What is your interpretation of it? That's a historical thinking skill that we're going to develop throughout the year. And of the 3, I'm thinking that it's going to be wealth is the biggest reason for the exploration to the New World. Once you look at part B and C and underline, highlight the key things in those 2 sections. Hey, there's a Columbian Exchange. We've seen that before. We've learned about what that is. So it's a little bit of repetitive. I like that. It's how we learn more. The Columbian Exchange is a what there. Columbian Exchange brought new crops to Europe. We know some of the new crops. Let's recall, let's reflect from what we learned before. What are some new crops brought to Europe? If you said vanilla, you are probably right, but I think the biggest crop is probably tobacco for the smokers, and the Irish was probably potatoes, and then that became a problem in the 1830s. So new crops were brought to Europe. These new crops stimulated European population growth. So the population of Europe grew. That eventually becomes the cause of colonization in the Americas because of the population growth. Also, the Columbian Exchange brought new sources of mineral wealth, especially gold and silver is what the European countries wanted. And so now Europe started to change from feudalism to capitalism. And I think one thing you need to know, most important thing, is that yes, land was the biggest issue with feudalism, but now capitalism, instead of land, minerals are becoming more important, especially gold and silver, and that is changing the economic system of Europe. Let's look at the final section, then section C of this key concept. And so improvements in maritime technology. We talked a little bit about this from the previous video. The caravel, the compass, and so on improved the ability of ships to travel long distances, so that definitely helped the exploration. And also financing it became much better, especially with joint stock companies. These were companies that had investors. They invested money in these explorers, hoping the explorers would return a big profit, especially returning gold and silver, and also slaves. So there's a new way of financing the European exploration, which increased dramatically during the 1500s. All right, next is key concept 1.22. I'll give you a few seconds, a minute, read through this, underline, highlight some of the key terms and things that you need to know for this key concept. All right, this first key idea, again, there's the Columbian Exchange, an important term, probably the most important term in period one. The Columbian Exchange and the development of the Spanish Empire. So Spain was the most powerful empire of Europe in the 1500s, especially in the Western Hemisphere. What is the result of this? It's a little bit of causation. This resulted in extensive changes. The changes include demographic, which means people, economic in terms of wealth and resources, and social changes, which is how the people lived. The key concept A, I think the most important thing maybe that you underlined was widespread deadly epidemics. So the Spanish especially brought diseases over to the Americas. We mentioned this in the previous video. 90% of all the Native Americans died as a result of disease. Okay, and so it's so sad, and it was awful what happened to the Native Americans. But besides the diseases, the Spanish did bring over some things that did help Native Americans and actually helped the Spanish conquest, was the introduction of new crops to the Americas and also animals. And we highlighted this when you think of new animals to the Americas. The one animal you need to think of is horses. Horses were brought over by the Europeans, especially the Spanish, and it changed America forever, especially for the Native Americans. Okay, let's look at section B, the encomienda system, very important term. The Spanish colonial economies marshaled Native American labor, so I underline Native American labor, to support plantation-based agriculture. So basically the Spanish took the Native Americans and made them slaves. Okay, and that's basically what the encomienda system was, which helped grow the power of the Spanish, especially in areas of the Southwest and Mexico, in order to get the precious metals and gold and silver that they wanted. So the encomienda system basically is forced labor of Native Americans. It's basically a type of slavery. So the Spanish were very brutal to these Native Americans, especially in Mexico and the Southwest. Section C is more unhappy news. European traders partnered with some West African groups who practiced slavery, and that's probably the key term here, to forcibly extract slave labor for the Americas. So another key term, all of this is going to affect the future of the United States and the Americas, and so now this is where a lot of the first slaves came from. They came from Africa, and so Europeans did start the first slave trade there, and the Spanish imported enslaved Africans to labor in the plantation system. So the two main groups for the Spanish were the Native Americans in the encomienda system, then eventually the African slaves coming over as well. In the end, the African slaves were much better for the Europeans because they did not die of the diseases. They're more resistant to it, unlike the Native Americans. All right, the final section, D, the Spanish developed a caste system. What color am I using? We're going to go purple. Okay, the caste system basically is a social hierarchy. Okay, and so everybody in the Americas knew their role because of the Spanish, and the Spanish were on top of that. The slaves, African and Native Americans in the encomienda system were on the bottom of it. And so that was the status of the people underneath Spanish rule. On top of this social system were the Europeans, then on the bottom were the Africans and the Native Americans. This is the final slide of the key concepts, and again, most of the videos will not be as detailed going over the key concepts, but because the book doesn't cover it very well in detail, I decided to go over each of the key concepts in detail with you to help you understand it. So why don't you go ahead and underline, highlight the key terms and ideas right now for section 1.23. Okay, in this first section, so we're talking about interactions between two groups, Europeans and Native Americans. So in their interactions, they asserted divergent worldview regarding issues of religion, gender roles, family, land use, and power. So all these things we actually talked about in the first video, how the Europeans and Native Americans were very different in how they viewed these major ideas. Okay, section A talks about mutual misunderstandings between the two groups, especially in the early years. And I don't know the wording of that, I don't know how I feel about that. Basically, the Europeans took advantage of Native Americans, especially think of with the Aztecs and Cortez, the way Cortez treated them. So, but I guess there was mutual misunderstanding. But over time, the Europeans and Native Americans did make some useful, or adopt some useful aspects of each other's cultures. So again, there are some positives of the Columbian Exchange. Okay, the horses, the animals coming over from Native Americans. On the flip side, the crops especially coming back to Europe. Okay, part B is trying to show a little change over time, that historical thinking skill change over time. As European encroachments on Native American lands and demands on their labor increased, Native peoples sought to defend and maintain their political sovereignty, economic prosperity, religious beliefs, and concepts of gender relations. So, Native Americans didn't just roll over, they tried to fight back eventually against European taking over their way of life. Okay, and the final section is section C. The extended contact with Native Americans, Africans fostered a debate among Europeans. Okay, and so Europeans did have to debate. There was a lot of conflicting viewpoints on how to handle the Native Americans and the Africans. And there was definitely conflict in the 1500s. And many of them that supported treating them poorly tried to evoke religious, cultural, and racial justifications for their treatment of Africans and Native Americans. But there were a few that stood up against the mistreatment, and one person's name is Bartolome de las Casas. We'll read about him, how he tried to help the Native Americans. The rest of the video will probably go a lot faster. We're going to go right to the textbook, the sections remaining in the textbook, and some of this we've already covered. So again, in this first section, the Columbian Exchange, so important in APUSH Period 1. Basically, it was a trade of plants, foods, animals, and germs between Europe and the New World and also Africa. So again, this is all review. So what went from the New World to the Old World? So what went from the Americas to Europe? Well, a lot of them were crops. So we talked about corn, potatoes, tobacco, some of the most important ones. So a lot of crops went to Europe, causing higher level thinking, what did that cause? It caused an increase in European population because they had new food to grow their population. And also, unfortunately, syphilis. I'm going to leave that one alone. Okay, so what came to the New World? What came to Americas from Europe? And the biggest thing we've already highlighted were domesticated animals, especially horses was a big thing. Also, important, I want you to highlight sugar cane. Okay, that crop becomes very important, especially in the West Indies, in the Caribbean Sea area. Sugar becomes a very important crop. Sugar needs a lot of heavy labor, and a lot of that comes from African slaves coming to the New World. Finally, I mentioned this quite a few times, but 90% of the pre-Columbian people died due to these diseases. Again, one of the saddest events really in history. The next section is the Spanish conquistadors. Important term, the Treaty of Tordesillas, 1494. This map, I think, does a good job down here showing what this treaty was all about. It was between Portugal and Spain. Basically, Portugal got all the land east of Brazil. Okay, so Portugal did get a little bit of Brazil. Hey, is that why Brazil, they speak Portuguese? It is why they speak Portuguese, because Portugal was able to control Brazil. But everything west of that was, in theory, controlled by the Spanish. And so who got the better deal? I'm pretty sure the Spanish did with the Treaty of Tordesillas, and that allowed the Spanish to really control the Americas. Right now, let's talk about the conquistadores, which is Spanish for the conquerors. And so the Spanish conquistadors, there were three. The biggest one you need to know is Cortez. Hernando Cortez, he basically conquers the Aztec Empire of Mexico for the gold and silver. And you're going to read about some of this later. It was awful what this person did, the Spanish conquistador did to the Aztec people. It was brutal, all for gold and silver for the Spanish. I will mention was Pizarro as well, and he basically did the same thing with the Incas in South America as well for the gold and silver. Again, that's why they came here, to make Spain a more powerful country. And finally, as we mentioned, the encomienda system is so huge. And so here's a definition of it. It is the theory that Indians would work on the farm and be converted to Christianity, but it's basically just slavery like we mentioned before. So in the end, they do become Christians in theory, but again, they have no freedoms, no rights, and they're treated as slaves. So the encomienda system was done by the Spanish. Specific detail of Cortez and the conquest of the Aztecs. So the Aztec king was a guy named Montezuma, and if you're a fan of the Polar Express, the little smart aleck boy mentions Montezuma about drinking hot chocolate. That's not true. Okay, it's all about historiography. Okay, but anyway, so the king of the Aztecs welcomed Cortez because he thought he was the Aztec god. I'm going to try to say his name, Quetzalcoatl. Okay, I tried, oh, not very good, but that was the Aztec god. Montezuma thought Cortez was the Aztec god. Eventually, Montezuma sees that Cortez is all about the gold, and so he does attack Cortez. Cortez and his men fought their way out. They got the help from smallpox, from diseases to beat the Aztecs. Estimated that the Aztec population shrank from 20 million to 2 million because of the diseases and also all the atrocities created by Hernando Cortez. One thing, a side note that did emerge from the mingling of these two races, the Spanish and the Native Americans, were the mestizos. So I would definitely underline mestizos. It's a new race that's formed of Spanish and Native American blood. The next section is the spread of Spanish America, and I have a couple other countries we're going to highlight, the English and the French. And here are some of the early explorers for these countries, and you don't need to know them for APUSH, but we'll look at a map here in a second. But again, they're not as important as the Spanish early explorers. Boy, I love maps, love looking at maps. Let's look at the maps. We got three countries. We've got the Spanish, we've got the English, and the French. Let's focus on the Spanish first. So the Spanish are in this blue purplish color, and so here are some of the early Spanish explorations into the New World. We have Columbus, and over here we have Cortez right here as well, some of the most famous ones. So they definitely explored present-day Mexico and the Bahamas, the Caribbean region. So they did have a lot of exploration, and they were the dominant power, especially in the time period. Okay, so now let's focus on the French. The French are in green. If you look at the regions where the French are going to be exploring, we've got over here along the eastern seaboard of the present-day United States and up here in Canada. And so this is why the French have such a strong presence here in Canada, is because of some of these early explorations as well. So the French definitely started their exploration a little bit later than the Spanish, especially in the 1500s when the French were exploring. And then the final, where are the English? I even see the, oh, okay, here are the English. All right, so where are the English? Well, the English are located way up here, okay, and so John Cabot, 1497, was the only English, he's actually Italian, but did explore for the English way up here in the northern part of present-day Canada. So they're not even on here during the 1500s. So again, the Spanish dominated most of their early exploration. The French had a little bit of say, but not much, and the English were just an afterthought. But all of that is going to change in the year 1588. Maybe some of you know what happened in 1588 between the Spanish and the English. We'll get to that in Chapter 2. Final main slide for this video, the spread of Spanish America continued. So we know that the Spanish, very hard, tough treatment of Native Americans, especially by the conquistadores, especially Cortez, who was located in and conquered the Aztecs. The Columbian system is a review. We talked about that before. I do want to highlight a few things, though, that is a little bit new material. So, the Spanish missionaries in New Mexico, and if you look at the map on the previous slide, New Mexico, present-day Southwest in America. So some of these Spanish missionaries, so these religious figures, tried to convert the Indians to Christianity, okay, a noble cause for them, which is what they tried to do in this region. Some Native Americans rebelled. And I want you to underline and highlight this event. Okay, there's not a lot of events in Period 1, but this is one, the Pueblo Revolt, also called Pope's Revolt in 1680. This was just an awful event that happened, but it does show that Native Americans were going to resist the Spanish taking over their lives. And so the Pueblos destroyed every Catholic church in their region and killed scores of priests. Okay, so dozens and dozens of priests were killed. These were Catholic priests were killed by the Pueblo, so it shows that the Native Americans were going to fight back. They were sick of their treatment by the year 1680. And eventually, it took the Spanish 50 years to eventually reclaim New Mexico. So this event, I think, is important, the Pueblo Revolt in 1680. And the final term I want you to know is the Black Legend. Okay, the Black Legend there's a definition there, was the belief that the Spanish only brought bad things, murder, disease, slavery to Native Americans. And there's a lot of truth in that. They did bring a lot of bad things there, especially the disease to the Native Americans. However, it's important to know. So that is what the Black Legend is. It's important to know. Again, we got to look at everything, look at all sides, have an open mind. The Spanish did bring some good things to Native Americans, such as a system of laws, different European architecture, Christianity, language, civilization. So there was some positives, that were brought over by the Spanish. Okay, and this final slide just summarizes 5 essential questions that covered all of Chapter 1, all of Period 1, that are important to know as we journey into American history. Fire up.